Brook trout, or Salvelinus fontinalis, is the state fish and only native stream-dwelling salmonid, salmon, trout, and char, in Pennsylvania, where approximately 1% of their historical watersheds remain intact. The species is important due to its sensitivity to environmental conditions and serves as an indicator of ecosystem health. The fish is culturally significant because it provides value to the region's heritage as a native recreational angling species. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission should create a special management area with angling regulations and no stocked, non-native trout to protect Pennsylvania's only stream-dwelling native trout, the brook trout, which has significant social and cultural benefits to the Commonwealth. While once found in nearly every county in Pennsylvania, brook trout have been significantly reduced and extirpated throughout their native range due to anthropogenic, environmental, and biotic factors. In Pennsylvania, the primary threats to native brook trout are poor land management, high water temperature, brown trout, sedimentation, and urbanization. While angling has not been a significant threat to the species recently, angling regulations have proven to protect populations and reduce other environmental factors' impact when the regulations are applied to an appropriately sized area. Additionally, unlike environmental conservation, including habitat improvement, pollution remediation, riparian planting, and water quality improvement, angling regulations incur no cost to the state. The presence of non-native trout species in brook trout populations has been documented to have deleterious effects on the species. Non-native trout outcompete native brook trout for habitat and food resources, disrupt spawning activity, introduce disease, and hybridize with native brook trout. Both stocked and wild self-sustaining populations of non-native trout negatively impact brook trout. However, wild non-native trout pose a greater risk for the displacement of native brook trout due to their ability to persist and multiply in the wild. Removing non-native trout eliminates one of the most significant threats to the brook trout's long-term survival. Removal of non-native trout species can be achieved through manual removal methods, the cessation of stocking, or the creation of angling regulations that prohibit the harvest of brook trout while allowing the harvest of non-native trout. Regardless of the removal method, eliminating the impact of non-native trout on brook trout should be an essential component of species conservation. The Upper Savage River in western Maryland is one of the few well-connected brook trout populations south of New England, with over 100 miles of connected streams. The Maryland Department of Natural Resources implemented catch-and-release angling regulations for brook trout exclusively throughout the upper watershed in the early 2000s and has monitored population response since. The brook trout population has responded favorably to the regulations, and according to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, the implementation of the special regulation has likely contributed biologically and recreationally to shielding the population during naturally occurring adverse environmental periods and maintaining large spawners in a high-quality fishery even in down years. In contrast to the findings in Maryland, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission conducted a study from 2004 to 2011 that included 16 stream segments where angling for brook trout was limited to catch-and-release angling. The study included population monitoring before implementing the experimental regulations, and 7 additional control streams were monitored during the trial period with no special regulations. The study results concluded that most experimental stream sections documented no significant increase in overall fish size. Pennsylvania's study mostly included small sections of remote headwater streams, and the stated goal of increased average fish size wasn't realized, which the authors attributed to other environmental factors. Research has shown an inverse correlation between fish size and survival, and that smaller body sizes may benefit the species' long-term survival. The experimental angling regulations in Pennsylvania were ultimately removed, and the program was abandoned in 2015. However, Upper Kettle Creek in Potter County, Pennsylvania, was later included in a catch-and-release, all-tackle angling regulation. The Pennsylvania study's authors noted that Kettle Creek was the only stream included in the experimental angling regulation program that showed an increase in the average adult brook trout size. The authors also noted that Kettle Creek's larger size relative to other streams in the experimental regulation program may have contributed to better results in that stream. While catch and release angling regulations remain in most of the upper watershed, the regulations apply to all trout species found in the stream, including non-native brown and rainbow trout. In addition to a self-sustaining wild non-native brown trout population in Upper Kettle Creek, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission continues to stock non-native brown and rainbow trout yearly. The differences in results between Maryland's Upper Savage River and Pennsylvania's experimental angling regulations could be attributed to the size of the watersheds where the regulations were applied. Research into the importance of watershed size and the connectivity within the watershed has shown that large, connected watersheds are important for gene flow and population resiliency. The importance of large, connected watersheds for brook trout populations is an approach shared by others within the brook trout's native range. In an interview with West Virginia Metro News, Dave Thorne, who heads the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources Trout Program, stated,
"They need to be large, contiguous, and well-connected native brook trout watersheds. This is a watershed idea based on a lot of the research I and other people have conducted. Connectivity between the tributaries and main stems is how we see increased growth in fish. They have larger habitat, more food available, and can move to different habitats during different parts of their life cycle."
In addition to Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, New York, Maine, and Tennessee all have established large, connected watersheds where brook trout are managed with angling regulations specific to the species and where numerous non-native trout removal and brook trout reintroduction projects have been carried out. With some researchers predicting up to a 68% decline in habitat suitable for brook trout survival in the mid-21st century due to climate warming, more creative techniques are necessary to ensure the long-term survival of the species. While some research has shown that angling regulations may have limited effects on average fish size, body size is not an essential metric for species conservation. Outside of Pennsylvania, angling regulations have resulted in more stable populations when applied to larger, connected watersheds. Many other states in the brook trout's native range have implemented special management areas for brook trout. Many have ceased stocking non-native trout on top of wild native brook trout, and most states have conducted manual non-native fish removal and native brook trout reintroduction projects. Pennsylvania is one of the few states in the eastern brook trout's native range with no special management areas established for brook trout. The state has conducted limited brook trout reintroductions and no non-native fish removals to date. Pennsylvania also lacks any large federal land tracts managed by the National Park Service, whose mission includes the protection of native fauna like brook trout. Pennsylvania currently lags other states in the brook trout's native range with regard to species management by decades or more in some cases. Implementing angling regulations to protect brook trout in large connected watersheds, ceasing the practice of stocking non-native trout on top of wild native brook trout, and allowing the harvest of non-native trout in those watersheds is an achievable set of management decisions that will require little more effort than the design and implementation of the regulations and the reallocation of stock trout to other nearby waters, and is desperately needed.